Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us today. As Carly said, my name is Jacqueline Bonrostro, and I am on the pesticide reduction team at the Xerces Society. So today we are going to be talking all about the ways that our amazing Bee City and Bee Campus affiliates are managing pests and keeping their landscapes beautiful, healthy, and buzzing with life, all while reducing their pesticide use. And as it turns out, there are so many different tools that we have in our tool belts that are non-chemical, things that we can do to prevent pest problems and protect our landscapes from pest problems that do arise and that address the root cause of pest problems before ever reaching into the chemical cabinet. And so before I get going, a quick story behind the picture on the slide here. Almost 3 years ago to the day, I was exploring the beautiful grounds of NC State University, which is actually one of our amazing bee campus affiliates, when I saw this really adorable bee that was sleeping in a camellia flower. And so this just reminds me that avoiding pesticides helps us protect all the life in our cities and campuses, just like this adorable bee. So a quick overview of where we are going today. First, I'm going to give a quick review of the principles of integrated pest management, or IPM, to kind of lay some groundwork. And then I'm going to introduce us to some brand new resources that we have to support affiliates on their IPM journey that we are really excited to share with you. And then I'm going to pass it off to really the stars of the show, three amazing affiliates who are going to share their strategies for reducing pesticide use through IPM and non-chemical management. So today we are going to hear from Elm Grove, Wisconsin, San Francisco, California, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I will introduce those amazing speakers right before they are up. So first, what is IPM, or integrated pest management? So we think about ecologically responsible IPM as a pest management framework that emphasizes prevention and eliminating the underlying causes of pest, weed, and disease issues, all while minimizing risks to people and the environment, including wildlife like our amazing pollinators. And so if you've ever been to a Bee City or a Xerces webinar before about integrated pest management, you have probably heard our metaphor about the three-legged stool. So IPM has three major components, and just like any stool, it wouldn't stand very well if you don't have any one of those three legs. So the first leg is prevention. Prevention is all about addressing the root causes of pest issues with non-chemical approaches. So preventative practices keep that system healthier by eliminating the conditions that favor pests. This can be things like ensuring plants are properly watered, ensuring proper soil pH and nutrient levels, using appropriate plant species as just a few examples. So ultimately, you are trying to reduce those stressors that cause pest problems to develop in the first place. This leg is also about other non-chemical strategies. So things like cultural control, biological control, and mechanical control also fit into this category. And so our second principle, or leg of our stool, is about understanding what pests are in your landscape and if that pest pressure even warrants any type of intervention in the first place. So this means observing and tracking pests regularly. Observing helps you see if the non-chemical and prevention techniques you're using are working, and if you can continue to manage the pest with those low impact methods. It'll also help you see if there are beneficial insects around that are going to help you eat those pests, like spiders and parasitoid wasps. So thinking about the pest pressure in your IPM plan is really key for reducing reliance on pesticides. And it's useful to constantly evaluate and be making choices about when and where a pest is enough of a problem to need some sort of management or justify the use of a pesticide. And we do encourage affiliates to set thresholds for pests below which we don't need to take any action. And finally, in some cases, there may be pests that defy our prevention techniques and defy our non-chemical control and move above those tolerable levels. And so while we certainly don't encourage the use of pesticides, if someone is going to apply a pesticide, it is really important to understand how to limit harm by reducing risk of exposure and by using pesticides of lower toxicity. So IPM is really built on these three principles, and like the three-legged stool in this image, together they really balance a framework that can reduce our reliance on pesticides and reduce impacts to pollinators and people alike. So why do we want to use IPM? Why is it so important in the first place? Well, cities and campuses, just like you all, are faced with this really important challenge of conserving pollinators and other insect biodiversity while also managing pest problems that might arise and keeping our landscapes healthy. And so to do this, we really need a more ecological approach to management that decenters chemical pesticides. And so, first of all, we need ecologically based IPM because the majority of insects are not even pests in the first place. Roughly 98% of insects are not pests, but rather they play really important roles in our ecosystems. So, things like providing food for wildlife, serving as our natural enemies that are going to help us eat pests, like the image of the spider you're seeing, pollinators, we're all familiar with those, even dispersing seeds and contributing to soil health. Those are all things that other 98% of insects are doing. And so managing our landscapes with IPM in a way that reduces pesticide use is going to help us conserve that other 98% of insects that are not pests. So let's take a quick look at what happens when we are reliant on pesticides in our landscapes. While everyone should really carefully follow label instructions, of course, if pesticides are used, unfortunately, we know that this is just not enough to protect pollinators and other insects from harm. So even using pesticides according to the label can cause insect die-offs and population declines, fewer habitat plants if we're using herbicides in our landscapes. And it can also cause pollinators and other insects to have a reduced ability to forage for food, greater disease susceptibility, or other reductions in their overall health. And so this is why it is so important for us to avoid using pesticides in the first place. And data tells us that pesticide contamination isn't just something that is theoretical in our communities. We are really seeing it out there in the real world. So, a brand new study by the Xerces Society and our partners at the University of Nevada, Reno, was just published in the journal Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry. And the scientists here really wanted to learn more about the state of pollinator habitat in our urban and residential communities, and especially plants that are hosts for butterflies or those plants that our caterpillars are using to develop. And what we found was a little surprising and also a little alarming. So, out of over 300 plants that were sampled across two cities, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Sacramento, California, we found that 93% of those butterfly host plants were actually contaminated with pesticides. Across both cities, 47 different pesticides were found, and each contaminated plant had a median of 3 and up to 18 compounds on a single plant. And so, what this tells us is that pesticide contamination is something that we really need to be aware of and strive to reduce in our communities. The good news here is that cities and campuses around the country are already making really great strides at reducing pesticide use and implementing IPM practices. And we really believe that every single community and every single campus can reduce their pesticide use. And B City and B Campus affiliates and the Xerces Society is, of course, here to help on that journey. So we have three brand new resources that I am really excited to share with you. And these can be found online in the existing IPM toolkit. So the first here is a template IPM plan, and this aligns really closely with that existing checklist that's in that IPM toolkit. And it's really meant to be a downloadable template for you to use as a starting point for your community if you maybe are developing your IPM plan for the first time, or maybe you're just looking for new ideas to revamp your IPM plan. The next new resource is a sort of menu, if you will, of non-chemical management practices for outdoor landscapes. It includes many options that really only scratch the surface of non-chemical management, but it does include examples of prevention techniques, mechanical control, cultural control, biological control, and even highlights some specific methods for managing things like weeds and mosquitoes. And the last new resource is a really a conversation guide because we know that affiliates work so intimately with departments within their city and campus. They're doing that boots on the ground work. So things like Parks Department, Public Works, and similar departments. And so this guide is really 10 questions to ask that department if you are interested in engaging with them more closely on pesticide use. So to walk you through some questions to ask and some things to listen for in that conversation as you have those discussions. And so all of these new resources can be found in the existing IPM toolkit on the Bee City website. And so just to give us a quick tour of kind of where we can find those resources. So if you're on the Bee City USA website, under resources and pesticides, you'll see our IPM toolkit. So if you go to part 2 with the IPM checklist, we have a new section there that you can download that PDF template IPM plan, and it'll look something like this. It'll go through the different sections that you might consider including in your IPM plan, and you can kind of copy paste the details from your unique city or campus. So that next resource, we've added a part 4 to our IPM toolkit that features non-chemical management tools for outdoor landscapes. And so if you click on part 4, you will be brought to a page that includes a drop-down menu of different non-chemical techniques, including prevention and cultural care, barriers and mechanical control, biological control, weed control, and mosquito control. And so each of those menus includes links that'll take you to a vetted resource, either a university extension or a Xerces website, where you can learn more about how to implement that tool in your landscape. And finally, if you scroll to the bottom of any section in that toolkit, under the further reading and resources section, you can find our 10 questions to ask your local land managers. Oftentimes people are interested in engaging more deeply with staff from their local parks department, but don't quite know where to begin. And so this resource will walk you through several questions to consider asking, and some key points to listen for. And so that's just kind of a little preview of that new resource. Okay, so that's enough for me. I am now thrilled to be turning it over to our amazing affiliates who are doing this work on the ground and implementing the principles of IPM to reduce pesticides and protect their beautiful buzzing landscapes. So today we are going to hear from Nikki Sternitsky from Elm Grove, Wisconsin, who is the chair of the Elm Grove Beautification Committee. Next, we will hear from Erica Tano from San Francisco, who works on the Urban Greening and Racial Equity team at the San Francisco Environment Department. And then finally, we will hear from Victoria Salerno from UW-Madison, who is a second-year PhD student in environment and resources. So I'm going to pass it off to Nikki. Go ahead and take it away and just let me know when you want me to advance the slide.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm quite proud to have 2 of us from Wisconsin presenting here today. This first slide is just a picture of our team. We won the CWISC, which was the Southeast Wisconsin Invasive Species Consortium Pullathon. CWISC is an 8-county invasive species consortium. And each spring they have a pullathon for garlic mustard and Dame's rocket. And I think this was our 3rd year as a part of having a team. And we very proudly brought home the traveling trophy for the year this year by pulling 2,180 pounds of garlic mustard and Dame's rocket within our community. So you can go ahead to the next slide. A large part of what we do within Elm Grove for the Bee City was this invasive species task force, which developed and started in August of 2020, shortly after we became a bee city. We meet each Sunday at 11 a.m. for only 1 hour. And it's been set at Sunday at 11 for 1 hour since then. And we are gradually increasing the number of people that we get within our community that participate. There's 2 area high schools who send their National Honor Society students for volunteer hours. And we have an email that goes out each Thursday, kind of letting everyone that's on the email list know where we're going to meet and what we're going to work on. And one of the things about the email in the group is that it is also an opportunity to educate people on invasive species and how to treat them and how to ID them. But the group has been quite successful, as you can see. And the grant that we did get from CWISC, we bought some supplies with that I'll share a little bit later with you. You can go to the next slide. So there are pictures from each one of these, because one of the things that we do with this invasive species task force is we work for an hour and then we try to stand or sit in front of our pile and get a picture of what we worked on and who everyone was that contributed and share it on social media. But it's kind of fun to see what a small group of volunteers can accomplish in less than 60 minutes. It's quite impressive. Keeping it to just 60 minutes is kind of nice because you know you're not going to take up a half of your day. But we work really hard because it's only 60 minutes and most of us are sweating pretty well by the end of it, especially when we're working on buckthorn at the end of the season, even though it's cooler like this time of year. One of our goals, we have this gorgeous 79-acre park in the middle of our tiny community, and we are trying to make it buckthorn free, which has been a much more difficult endeavor than I anticipated, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. You can go to the next slide. Some of the tools that we have gotten, the polar bear tree wrench, with our grant and with money that we raised through native plant sales, we purchased 4 tree wrenches that can take out some pretty decent sized buckthorn. And we actually allow residents to rent the tree wrenches for a minimal amount of money. You know, they cost upwards of $300 and we'll rent them out for like suggested donations of just $5 an hour. One of our most recent purchases is we got 4 parsnip predators. It's this specifically designed tool by the prairie enthusiasts that are in Wisconsin. And it's designed to help remove invasive species such as teasel, wild parsnip. I'm blanking on the name of, burdock, and then white and yellow sweet clover. And the handle is turned and you can just, with 1 foot, kind of sever the root 3 feet below, or at least 3 inches below the soil surface, minimizing therefore herbicide use. Now I did add the herbicide daubers that we purchased from the North American Invasive Species Management Association, which also happens to be in Madison. The first 3 years that our invasive species task force worked in the fall at our village park, removing buckthorn, we did not use herbicide, which I think in a home landscape is fine because you can continually go back and remove the suckers that come. But in a public space where you're only getting to it once a year, we quickly figured out that we needed to find a way to minimize herbicide use. And these daubers have worked really well. There's a blue dye that's added and you can just apply the herbicide to the cambium layer of the buckthorn. And we've noticed upwards of 95% eradication of the buckthorn, which is really helping speed our ability to remove buckthorn in public spaces. You can go to the next slide. As far as an integrative mess management plan goes, it hasn't been an easy endeavor, but Jacqueline has been crucial at really helping our community be able to do this. Elm Grove is a small community, which is a suburb of Milwaukee. It's only 3.28 square miles. And it was named proudly 2014 Best Suburb in America by Business Insider, partly because we are a affluent, well-educated community. But with that, I think comes the highly coveted monoculture of lawn and heavy herbicide, pesticide use. So approaching an IPM plan has been a little bit more difficult, but thanks to Bee City and all the resources that Laura and Jacqueline offer, we are opening the door to getting our own IPM plan. You can go to the next slide, Jacqueline. So this is kind of how we got started with the discussion. We brought a professor in during Pollinator Week as one of our events from the University of Madison to talk about the human impact of pesticides, which was fascinating and really quite well received, better than I had expected. And that prompted a homeowner to reach out and write an article about pesticide use in our little local newspaper, about the effects that they have seen in their yard because of pesticide use. And now this upcoming March, we have a winter lecture series each year, and we're bringing in another professor from UW-Madison to talk about specifically neonicotinoids. And a lot of area, not necessarily our community, but surrounding communities have expressed a lot of interest in these talks and discussions. So it's really exciting to see it gaining traction. You can go to the next slide. And this is just kind of for other communities that are looking for ideas. One thing that, or a couple of the things that we have found, the first image on the bottom is a map of Elm Grove. As you can see, it's really quite small. There are 2,270 properties, I believe it is, in our community. And we started back in August adding a little orange dot to each household that grew even just one variety of native milkweed. And we call it our monarch milkweed map. And we started out with a mere 28 dots. And each year we kind of set a goal to get as many dots as we can. And we're now up to, I think it's 428 dots on our map. But, who doesn't like a monarch butterfly? And, through that and, people seeing monarchs lay eggs and then the caterpillars, kind of engaging them with all of the actions that they can take to help support the monarchs. The second picture is the federally endangered rusty patch bumblebee, which I excitedly have seen in my yard. And connecting again in Madison is a woman by the name of Judy Cardine, who helps run the Wisconsin Bumblebee Observer webpage. I can see you shaking your head. She's an amazing resource about just teaching about everything, again, that we can do to help protect this cute little fuzzy bumblebee who's kind of one of the only homelands left is our area. And then birds, again, who doesn't like our feathered friends? Elm Grove has been a Bird City, Wisconsin affiliate since the early 90s and has become a high flyer status, and all of the things that we can do to help the birds and using the birds to educate people about, rodenticides and the effects that all of these chemicals can have on our bird population as well. I think that might be it, right, Laura? All right, Jacqueline?
I believe so. Thank you so much, Nikki. I'm just going to back up to get your slides started. Oops, sorry, Erica. All right. Thank you so much, Nikki. That was amazing. I love learning about all the things that you're doing in Elm Grove. And next, we are going to pass it off to Erica Tano from San Francisco.
Hello, just making sure, can you guys hear me well? Okay. Okay, awesome. So I'm Erica Tano. I am a California Climate Action Corps fellow at the San Francisco Environment Department, and this is actually my second year with the Urban Greening and Racial Equity team. Next slide, please. So just some of the topics that I'm going to be covering today will be the current citywide integrated pest management initiatives and pesticide use trends, the IPM in the city's climate action plan, which I will be referring to as the CAP throughout the presentation, and the Bee Friendly Neighborhoods project that I am currently working on. So as you can see here, we have an upside down pyramid. This is the IPM pyramid of the decision-making process that is applied in San Francisco. Some of the pests on city properties include rodents and mosquitoes, which are vectors for disease. And as for invasive plants on city properties, there's the French broom and the Himalayan blackberry, which are concerns because of the disruptive effects on the native plant and animal communities, and also have negative economic impacts. For the first tier, we actually have design and maintenance. This is where the prevention happens through sealing up cracks, holes, or any entry points for pests. But when controls need to be implemented, we begin with physical or mechanical methods, so traps, weed removals, anything that doesn't really have any disruptive effects on public health or ecosystems. Next is biological methods, so using pheromones for insects and sticky traps, stuff like that. And then lastly, the chemicals, which is obviously the most risky and is also our last resort, so using any pesticides. But if this is necessary, the Environment Department actually screens higher risk chemicals and restricts how they are used. Um, there should be a link that will be provided in the chat, but if you guys wanted to check it out, the city has a reduced risk pesticide list, which is updated annually. But yeah, the city has tiers for the pesticides that are kind of on this list. So tier one obviously being the most hazardous, and these are the highest hazards and have the highest priority for replacement with a safer alternative. Then there's tier two and tier three, which decreases in hazardous levels. But these tiers have helped set a focus on which products the city would like to focus on for replacing. Yeah, and I wanted to highlight some of the accomplishments this program has had over the years. So, San Francisco is one of the first cities to ban the use of single feed rodenticides due to data on adverse effects. On adverse impacts to predatory birds, and this ban was followed a community process incorporating nonprofits, profits, and the SF Department of Public Health. And then in 2009, they banned the use of gopher baits as a precautionary measure due to the potential adverse impacts on other wildlife. And in 2014, the city removed the last neonic insecticide from city properties. And as of January 2025, neonics were actually no longer available for sale in retail nurseries and garden centers in California. The city just happened to be a few years earlier from this ban. So currently, the program actually has a virtual monthly IPM technical advisory committee meeting. And these meetings, they identify featured speakers on topics such as habitat restoration for rare plants, rodent management, and pollinator gardens in urban spaces. And these meetings also provide a really good forum for IPM professionals to share tips and guidance on how to manage pest problems while limiting or avoiding the use of harmful pesticides. They also have IPM trainings for city departments, so Rec and Park, public of utility or PUC and Department of Public Works. And various topics for these meetings include native and invasive plant identifications and IPM to manage aquatic weeds. One of the coolest stats for this program is actually that the city has continued to maintain low levels of Tier 1 herbicide use. And actually, San Francisco has reduced the use of Tier 1 herbicides by 99.4% from 2010 to 2024. As you can see on this graph, there is a steep increase in use for Tier 3 pesticides, but this is actually just to be able to, there's a specific level of Tier 3 pesticides needed to have like the same effect as Tier 1, so that's why there's sort of that big contrast there. Yeah, so as for pest management within the city, I wanted to frame it within the Climate Action Plan, which is a framework that the city has to reach net zero emissions by 2040 while also centering racial, social, and economic equity. Some of the sectors the Climate Action Plan in the city includes are responsible production and consumption, energy supply, housing, and healthy systems, which is the chapter I'm going to be focusing on right now. So within this chapter, the city emphasizes the use of nature-based solutions in order to combat and mitigate the impacts of climate change. IPM within this chapter is a sort of tool to manage weeds and other invasive species sustainably. It's important for restoring biodiversity in parks, natural lands, and open spaces. And biodiversity supports natural pest control, so that also already reduces the needs for chemical pesticides. But the IPM is related to my work on the urban greening and racial equity team in these ways. The citywide IPM initiatives are really focused on buildings and landscapes owned by the city or leased from the city, but that really isn't the only way to capture the whole picture of IPM in San Francisco. What I focus on as a climate action fellow is actually really engaging with the community. So our sort of form of IPM within the department also requires residents to show up, whether this be through community engagement or land stewardship. Actually, in this photo, I led a volunteer event back in July where we were partnering with the Visitation Valley Greenway and we were cleaning up invasive species and weeds just along the greenway for a couple hours in the morning. And that was actually kind of endangering a very brand new native plant garden they had planted in that area. And we were able to collect around 20 volunteers to weed within a couple hours. So that's one way we try to have IPM within the community. And then the Environment Department also recently launched a volunteer program in June, I believe. And what they got from San Francisco residents is one of the big volunteer forms they are really interested in is urban greening. And we have a lot of space and a lot of need for land stewardship and IPM measures such as weeding for the city. So the volunteer program has really helped our local urban greening organizations in this way. And another piece actually for this sort of puzzle are the local nurseries that I get to work with. If you can move to the next slide. So the Bee Friendly Nursery Pledge is a pledge for local nurseries to institute pollinator-friendly practices. And then I will go over some of the bee-friendly plant nursery pledge requirements. So the first one is actually to adopt an IPM to minimize pesticide use and prioritize eco-friendly solutions. For this, my colleague and I created a toolkit for nurseries to look over. Some of the IPM requirements we have are to have, or we like to encourage these nurseries to use are like physical controls, so having physical barriers or manually removing pests through pruning or washing. Some biological controls include encouraging natural predators by planting nectar-rich flowers or controlling ants. And then we also like to encourage cultural control, which is applying things like landscape fabric and mulch to manage the weeds effectively. And then the rest of the requirements for this pledge are to eliminate systemic pesticides. We just put neonics just because this was actually made or developed in mid 2024 or late 2024, right before the statewide ban. And then prevent the spread of Phytophthora by following strict sanitation practices, saying no to invasive plants that threaten native biodiversity, and to sell local SF native plant species. So right now we actually have 8 plant nurseries pledged across San Francisco, San Mateo, and the East Bay. As you can see on the map that is on the screen, there's 2 shades of green. So there's a dark green, which are actually plant nurseries that are native plant nurseries, and then the light greens are for-profit nurseries and garden centers. So I would say these ones are actually more accessible in comparison to the native plant nurseries, but I'll go further in that sort of distinguishment between those nurseries in a bit. So for the tiers, my colleague and I have sort of developed this throughout the process of connecting with nurseries in San Francisco. As you can see, having an IPM is the bare minimum throughout the 3 tiers. But tier 1 is basically a gold star for each requirement. So you have little to no use of pesticides, and you also don't sell any pesticides. That kind of falls more for the for-profit nurseries. They have great phyto practices. They don't sell or provide any invasive species, and they sell SF natives of San Francisco provenance or origin. For tier 2, again, have an IPM plan. And then for category 2 and 3 pesticides, we have a list that is actually based on the, what was it? On the UC Agriculture and Natural Resources B precaution pesticide ratings. So I can also I forgot to provide a link for that, but that is also public information. A lot of this is kind of based off what we encountered throughout the nurseries and, local findings and research. And so, yeah, again, tier 2, there would be minimal ground and bench management and sanitation. Again, no invasive species, and they're able to sell SF natives. This is a little less strict in that these natives don't really have to have the San Francisco origin. And then lastly, tier 3 is, again, to have an IPM plan and sort of start kind of moving towards tier 2. A lot of our profit nurseries within the city actually fall underneath tier 3, and we're in the process of moving the 3 nurseries on the map more so towards tier 2. A lot of them sell a couple invasive species, so the line between tier 2 and 3 are kind of blurry right now, but we're actively trying to get these for-profit nurseries to get much closer to the nonprofit nurseries. And the next slide, please. And then I just wanted to share some information and findings from our nursery visits throughout the city. In this picture, this is actually me and a former colleague. We were visiting a local for-profit nursery, and this is actually a display of their California native section, which is actually one of the bigger or biggest native plant section that we found within the profit sector. So when the pledge was actually created a few years ago, all the nurseries that were featured on that list were nonprofit nurseries that were native plant specialists or restoration specialists. So in addition to reconnecting with these nurseries, years later, we also wanted to include more accessible for-profit nurseries. Again, I am on the urban greening and racial equity team, so we really try to focus on certain communities, and a lot of these for-profit nurseries are open on certain schedules, very limited hours, and sometimes they don't even really provide native plants to the public that often, especially because those plants are pretty much reserved for restoration. We found that obviously it is harder for these for-profit nurseries to replicate nonprofit growers where they had the time, the space, the capacity, or the funding to implement a lot more proper sanitation practices and even grow SF natives, which is pretty hard to do still within the nonprofit sector. You really would have to be like in San Francisco to be selling these SF natives. And then on the contrast, for-profit nurseries are very limited to the just the state of the out-of-county growers, or even just the confinements of their own urban or their own nursery spaces. And so, as fellows on the Urban Greening and Racial Equity team, we wanted the Bee Friendly program to really make San Francisco's biodiverse, healthy ecosystems be more accessible to certain communities across the city. So, including 4 nonprofit nurseries as part of this pledge has allowed us to bring local urban greening efforts, pollinator education, and climate action to the general public. We're always trying to work and to encourage communities to engage with their local green spaces and steward them as a way to restore the habitat, implement IPM with their own hands, and to get communities to reconnect with nature. And yeah, I forgot to add my email at the end of this presentation, but I can add that if anyone has any questions about, healthy ecosystems or the city's IPM plans, I can direct you to our specialists in the department for that. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica. Amazing work in San Francisco. All right, we are going to pass it off to our last affiliate spotlight, Victoria Salerno with UW-Madison. Victoria, go ahead and take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jacqueline, for the introduction. My name is Victoria Salerno. I'm a PhD student at UW-Madison. As Jacqueline mentioned, I'm in the Environment and Resources program, but I have a strong background in entomology and work with a wonderful team at Madison, pushing sustainable initiatives, among which is Bee Campus, and then how we are going about our land management. You can hit the next slide. So I just want to provide a little background on UW-Madison as a campus. For those who are not aware, UW-Madison is a public land-grant university that was founded in 1848. We serve about 34,000 undergraduate students and roughly 14,000 graduate and professional students. So we're a larger university in the Big Ten, and we've been a part of the Bee Campus program since 2023. You can essentially think of 2023 as being our first year. Technically, we got involved in 2022 and then had that first full year in 2023. We are a larger campus with around 939 acres, making up our main campus and our natural adjacent Lakeshore Nature Preserve, which is a natural area that we manage. And then we have about 1,200 acre arboretum that is roughly about 4 miles from our main campus. So this is another wonderful green space and area that students are actively engaging with throughout their time at UW-Madison, as well as the surrounding Greater Madison area. During our time as UW-Madison, we've put a lot, as a Bee Campus university, we're putting a lot of effort towards our habitat management. We've installed bee hotels, installed pollinator habitats and lawns, and then we've really taken an eye towards our land management and how we're going about being sustainable and reducing the pesticide use that we have there. So Madison, along with being participants in Bee Campus, are participating in a green ground certification through Rewild Your Campus. And for those who are not familiar with that, Rewild Your Campus is a group that basically asks campuses to create healthier and more resistant landscapes by reducing the use of synthetic pesticides. So UW-Madison is sitting at what's considered a silver sort of status in this program, as roughly about 70% of all our managed lands are pesticide free. So when we're looking at 3 major areas, and that is our main campus, Lakeshore Nature Preserve, and the Arboretum, we're seeing a variety of different sort of levels of use of synthetic pesticide. And if you go to the next slide, I want to highlight the fact that we're putting our main campus at 0%. And the reason why we're doing this is that we want to be very intentional with how we're going forward with our metrics. And we say 0% because we want to be very conservative in the fact that the main campus is largely pesticide free, but we're working to understand exactly where and how we're using chemicals. And therefore, until we have a full understanding, we're feeling like we want to sit at that 0%, really evaluate where we're at, and then move forward from there. So on campus, we're largely using cultural, physical, or mechanical and biological methods to reduce our pesticides use. But we really want to be intentional with understanding how we can improve these practices. So have you go to the next slide. So as part of Rewild Your Campus, we are engaging in an organic land management pilot. So what this looks like is we are asking our grounds team, our campus landscape management team, and other stakeholders on campus to commit to using organic alternatives when managing 4 different turf and traditional lawn spaces on campus. And so I want to highlight the areas that we're doing this with. We're doing it outside of a main dormitory, Og Hall, as well as 2 very large sort of mall-scapes, Library Mall and Henry Mall, which are areas on campus where students are actively passing through, actively spending their time, and the Divine Nine, another sort of dormitory housing sort of area. So we have asked campus and campuses participating in this pilot that essentially reduces the use of pesticide use in these spaces by using organic alternatives. And so it relies upon the practice of using compost, corn gluten meal, and soil aeration instead of the use of traditional pesticides. And I really kind of want to break down what we're using here. So instead of managing our weeds and keeping our turf grasses to that sort of aesthetic looking turf we might think of with pesticides, what we're doing is we're adding compost to sort of naturally fertilize and keep that lawn space growing and green. And then using corn gluten meal, which is just a byproduct of sort of the wheat process that essentially stops weed germination. So we're able to spread this, it's in a granulated form or a powder on the lawn. And this product essentially stops all weeds from popping up and germinating again, allowing for our traditional turf grass to stay consistent. And then we're providing soil aeration, which is reducing that compaction, essentially allowing our turf grass to stay healthy by allowing nutrients and water and airflow to get into that turf, keep that sort of base really solid and growing well, and then naturally suppressing the weeds through that nice fresh kind of growth through the turf. So we've been using this, essentially this pilot has started over the last year. And so what we are planning to see is that in a 3-year pilot, so we'll look at this after 3 years, and we're expecting to see and hoping to see that the turf grass is just performing just as well as other large turf grass spaces on campus. This pilot is actually pushed largely by some undergrads at the university. For those who are familiar with Madison, for those who are not, Madison is sort of in its sort of futuristic, beautiful view of what you might think of the campus. We have Bascom Hill, which is a super large hill that has beautiful turf grass. And essentially, students have been pushing to have that space be transitioned to a pollinator lawn or reduce the pesticide use and management in those spaces. So through this pilot, we're hoping to demonstrate to the greater campus, the Madison area, and the students is that turf grass management and keeping those traditional spaces is possible without the use of pesticides. Can move on to the next slide. I want to move past our main campus into the Arboretum. So as I mentioned, this is about 4 miles away from the main campus. We have e-bikes for students to travel over there. We see student groups from classes to volunteers to just students engaging at the space for fun. The Arboretum is a beautiful landscape that is sort of a highlight of Madison as a campus. But is about 1,200 acres, so it's a large space to manage, and is largely managed by a separate group than those that manage the grounds on campus. And the Arboretum focuses on reducing its pesticides. So this is one of the areas that we say that 99% of our pesticide use is eliminated there. So as you can see in the image, the bottom image, we have these red areas, and this is a map of the whole Arboretum with the red areas representing pollinator habitat in red. So these are places that we know we have pollinators. We've seen rusty patch bumblebees, we have monarch, host plants, we have milkweed, we have really good foundational plants there that on top of having that, we're being very intentional about our management. The Arboretum is largely spot treated with pesticide, meaning that there's limited, if not any broadcast spray. And the Arboretum staff are going out, mechanically removing plants and sort of painting on small amounts of pesticides. As Nikki mentioned, it's hard in a large space to maintain, native plants, reduce invasive plants, and keep those pest species down when you're only visiting those spots once a year, if not, maybe not even that, as you're going through your priorities for the year. And so the Arboretum was very intentional about pulling out those species as early as possible, getting a little bit of pesticide on there, herbicide, to knock that down. On top of that, pesticide use in the Arboretum is very low, with only minimal herbicide use. So we're not seeing any sort of insecticides or fungicides used in these spaces as well, which Nikki as well mentioned, like we care about the downstream effects of these pesticide uses. And it's important that we're doing that in such a natural space that's providing biodiversity services. One other thing that I'd like to highlight at the Arboretum is that we're using this alternative product called Final Sam. So Final Sam is not a pesticide, but rather it is a herbicidal soap. So essentially, you're able to apply this to the plants, and it actually does turn plants blue in color. So you can actively see when the product is working. And it has allowed the Arboretum, specifically in the Longer-Necker horticultural garden, to stop using glyphosate since 2021. So this has been a product that we've been using, we've seen success with, and have been really able to control our weeds without having to have such a heavy sort of pesticide of glyphosate on our lands. The other thing that the Arboretum has been sort of crafty about when it comes to our land management is using battery-powered string trimmers. And the importance of this is that when you have a battery-powered string trimmer, you're able to take that with you when you're out in the field. So you're not relying on needing to have to plug it in or having gas and needing to sort of refill that tool so often. So the garden managers are carrying around these string trimmers as they go, which is allowing them to sort of directly tackle issues as they come up without having to like let it sit for a while or have sort of the time-consuming nature of having different types of tools. So these methods at the Arboretum have really allowed them to get like to 99% reduction in pesticide use and herbicide use and all of that. Go to the next slide for me. Thank you. Ooh. And then I also want to highlight our Lakeshore Nature Preserve. So this is another area that's adjacent to campus. So many students who are traveling to and from class are engaging on what's called like Lakeshore Nature Preserve Path. So they're passing by this beautiful Lake Mendota and all this natural habitat that leads into a larger preserve that is not only an area where we're having biodiversity services, we're having students really engage in learning. Just like the Arboretum, Lakeshore Nature Preserve is that active sort of research and engagement community space. And in this area, we also see that level of spot treatment. Lakeshore Nature Preserve has gone about their integrative pest management by having decision-making tools. So they have an entire invasive plant handbook that they review, and then as they're going throughout their management priorities for the season, they're looking back at that, figuring out how to actively assess the problem, what tools are appropriate at a given time, given the severity of the invasion of certain plants and the priority of the treatment that's needed there. Lakeshore Nature Preserve has also engaged really well with students in alternative methods such as prescribed burns. So we have an entire course on campus where undergraduate and graduate students can get trained in how to do prescribed or controlled burns in order to knock back invasive species. So we're having really engaged sort of conversations about how we're moving forward without pesticides in these spaces. And this is another space where it is only limited to herbicide use. So moving back to having a super large area of land that you're trying to manage, there's the use of herbicide in such a decisive and sort of minimal use when we're looking at use on this space. The other thing is Lakeshore Nature Preserve, being such a adjacent space to the larger campus, has gone about its master plans, essentially its trajectory moving forward with intention. And so in this new master plan for this space, there has been a large discussion around vegetation management and how to sort of move forward in these spaces, with the idea is that this master plan is not set in stone, but rather a living document to be reevaluated. So this is another space where there is a lot of discussion and sort of revision of priorities and needs as you're going forward. So Madison, given its super large space, has been super intentional to not only engage in conversations around pesticides, but actively sort of teach our student body, as well as, change our methods so that we're not only, using herbicides or pesticides in any way, but rather being very direct with how we're managing and sort of reevaluating our landscape spaces. I did not provide my email or anything, but I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victoria, Erica, and Nikki. Big kudos for all the amazing work you're doing in your community. And I think, yeah, we would love to take questions from folks who have the time to stick around. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, just a heads up, everyone, we're gonna go for another half hour if questions go that long. So feel free to chime in if you have the questions in the Q&A.
And if you need to leave, we completely understand. And this is recorded and will be up on the Xerces YouTube channel on the Bee City USA playlist. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into questions here. They were kind of asked as folks were talking. So if they're directed at a particular person, I'm going to address those first. The first one's for Jacqueline. Peter is wondering what the landscape typologies were, for example, private yards, community gardens, street plantings, campuses, etc., where you did the sampling in Albuquerque and Sacramento.
Great question. It was a combination of publicly managed spaces that were managed by the parks departments in those respective cities, as well as we got some volunteers who have privately managed pollinator gardens. So think, a residential front yard or backyard. The sampling wasn't, to my knowledge, it wasn't equal in those two spaces. We didn't have an equal amount of, sites and parks versus equal amount of private gardens. It was very opportunistic based on the volunteers we got, but it was a combination of those two spaces in both cities.
Great, thank you so much, Jacqueline. And the next question was also for you. Marcel had kind of an anecdote about something that had happened in her own yard. So she had ash trees that were infected with emerald ash borer, and the trees were injected and the soil drenched with imidacloprid. They died anyway, and she had the trees removed and the stumps ground out. And she says she knows the chemicals can last a long time, potentially up to 10 years. And her question is, how can she cleanse the soil in those areas so she can put pollinator plants down without them being poisoned or the bees and butterflies being poisoned? Does she need to remove the soil? And if so, how much? And is there such a thing as flushing the soil?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sorry you lost your trees. That's such a tricky issue, emerald ash borer. I don't know specifically about cleansing soil or ways to decontaminate that soil, but I will say, and I'm not sure if this is relevant since you've already lost those trees, but since this is a systemic product, it sounds like you already know this. It's going to be present in soil. It's also going to be present in every part of that plant tissue, including the leaves. And so I know we're in fall, leaves are falling. And so if you did get any leaves falling from those trees while they were alive, I would probably not leave those leaves, right? We always tell people to leave the leaves. We want you to do that. But if you are dealing with a tree that's been treated with some sort of systemic product, I would go ahead and bag up any leaves that came from that tree while it was still around, and dispose of that rather than distributing them. That would be one way to sort of prevent any further contamination.
Great, thank you so much, Jacqueline. That's great advice. The next few questions were for Nikki. The first one is, Nikki, what do you do with the garlic mustard and Dame's rocket that is pulled? Can this be composted industrially?
No, per the Wisconsin regulations, we do have it picked up by trash men. It's unfortunately put in plastic bags and picked up, marked invasive species. Theoretically, if either of those species are not flowering, first year florets, rosettes, they could be composted. But if they've flowered, even after you pull them, they can sometimes still set seeds. So I generally don't recommend people home composting them if they have flowered for that reason.
Great, thank you so much, Nikki. And somebody else was wondering if you have a brand of tree wrench that you recommend.
We use the Polar Bear. It's out of Canada, and they have quite a few different varieties of tree wrench that you can use, different sizes. Ours, they're kind of a heavy product, but I pulled out a buckthorn that was taller than our 2-story house all on my own with no help using the tree wrench. So they're pretty effective. When we work on public property, we usually do it in teams of 2 because it tends to be a little bit easier. It's obviously a little bit slower than just cutting and dabbing, but we are avoiding the use of any herbicide. There is soil disturbance when you do that, which theoretically increases likelihood of any prior dropped berries germinating. But it is a really nice way for homeowners to get small infestations out of their yard with no use of herbicide.
Great, thank you so much, Nikki. And we have one last question for you that's about buckthorn. What kind of herbicide do you use on buckthorn that has a high efficacy? Do you have a name that you could give folks?
I'm sorry, I would have to go look and see what was recommended by our village forester. But I think one of the things that we do is, we daub it almost immediately within 30 minutes of cutting it. And we've only now been starting to go back through, and that's where I got that 90 to 95%. I've only seen a rare resprouting, and even if it is resprouting, it's deformed. It's definitely been affected by the herbicide use. I can look it up if that person wants to email me and get them an answer to that, though.
Great. Thank you so much, Nikki. And the next questions were for Victoria. A few people were wondering if you happen to know where they can source the corn gluten meal and also how it is applied.
Yeah, so actually some local feed and supply stores have corn gluten meal. Amazon also sells it in different sort of varieties as well. So it is, I think, like pretty readily accessible. I don't know that most people have been looking for it. The nice thing about corn gluten meal is that it's spreadable. So you can either use a spreader or sort of sprinkle it across your lawn. And not only does it suppress weeds by suppressing that germination, it also is kind of a natural slow release fertilizer for the lawn too. So it's allowing your lawn to sort of keep its health while also suppressing that weed pressure as well. So I don't know where the university in particular sourced it, but I was able to sort of find different varieties, just searching it right away. Corn gluten meal for weed suppression, and a few different varieties will pop up for you.
And I've read up on this as well because I learned about corn gluten meal from your annual report this year, and it was really, really interesting. So I just to a couple things. It needs to be applied pretty thickly. It isn't something you can do a light application of, and it only works for roots on the surface. It doesn't get anything that's underground. So if it's an established weed plant, it doesn't impact it. And the efficacy may be different for different weeds, but it'll depend, and probably just, test it out and see if it works for your little ecosystem.
Yeah, another thing to add to that, the application period for that, I think when it's most effective is sort of early spring. So you're thinking late March to really early April is kind of getting ahead of that weed pressure there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victoria and Laura. The next question is going to be for Erica, and it's from Lauren with the city of Raleigh. And she is wondering if there was any conflict of interest issues with the SF listing private nurseries. They're exploring this option too.
Hello. So there wasn't really any conflict, at least with the nurseries themselves. This is just a pledge. There's no really sort of binding aspect to it besides, the nurseries coming to us with their information. And a lot of these private nurseries are usually pretty happy to be featured on the website. However, I would say there was an issue with a local sort of pollinator group, kind of bringing up the point that one of the nurseries was selling an invasive species that was, highlighted on the California Invasive Plant Council list. And we had to kind of point out that this project is still kind of in a development. We had to really highlight that there are tiers on the website. We will be making it more accessible, that at least that information. So there again, like there's different tiers to the pledge, which is kind of the biggest thing that people will have to seek out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erica. Appreciate it. The next few questions are kind of anybody can answer them. They weren't specifically directed at anyone. Pamela is wondering if there are any ideas for discouraging hornets from building nests in her yard that's in the city.
I can take a stab at this one, and anyone, with more information can jump in. But this one, without pesticides, we really think about prevention as being kind of the first step here. Hornets will often, I'm not sure where they're nesting in your yard, but they're gonna go for cracks oftentimes within a structure. So looking for those gaps, looking for those places where the cracks aren't completely sealed, and then working to seal those is going to be a really great step to make sure that your yard is no longer an attractive place for them if they can't find a spot. Making sure trash cans are sealed, anything that's going to attract them in, just really making your yard less of a hospitable environment. Cleaning debris as much as you feel, comfortable. Of course, we want to leave the leaves, save the stems for pollinators, but making sure that we're cleaning debris where we can to prevent them from coming back. Now, they could be mistaken. So hornets tend to nest, up high, build a structure, but yellow jackets could be mistaken for them. They're going to go more for burrows. They're going to be more of a ground nesting species. If you're having that kind of issue, those species really like to nest in old rodent burrows. And so if you know of anything like that in your yard, and in the winter time when the wasps are gone, go ahead and collapse those old burrows that are no longer in use. That could also prevent them in the spring from finding those nice spaces in your yard and making a home there.
And then again, also bumblebees may like those spots too. So
Great point. Yeah.
yeah, hopefully you can find some spots to leave those little crevices for bumblebees to, yeah, use those old rodent nests and whatnot.
All right, thank you so much, Laura and Jacqueline. This one, I believe it might be directed towards Victoria, but have you seen a diverse group joining the efforts at the schools, or is it just the typical environmental groups?
Yeah, that's a great question. We definitely see environmental groups that are like pushing for more sustainable initiatives, but we've seen a wide variety of students engaging. We've had student groups that have just been interested in having more flowering plants, or really specifically like bees. Really kind of just push and say, hey, we're interested in, pushing a sustainable initiative here. UW-Madison has a green fund, which is essentially an opportunity for undergraduate students to propose to the Office of Sustainability a sort of sustainable project that they can apply for, and essentially try and get funding to then have that sort of sustainable initiative happen on campus. So the fact that we have new bee hotels going in, a pollinator lawn, e-bikes, all of that is like different student groups and different student identities really pushing for access to green spaces and being able to enjoy outdoors and pollinators and all of that. So we're seeing a lot of engagement, not only from students, but faculty and the surrounding and like area too. We get so many visitors on campus, given its size, and its Madison is really kind of nestled in the heart of the city. So we're seeing a lot of engagement across not only students, but the community as well. So it's been great and not really restricted to those environmental groups at all.
Awesome. That's great to hear, Victoria. That's been your experience. We're down to our last question. So if anybody has a lingering question they want to submit to the Q&A, please do so now. This question folks can answer in the chat if they have some ideas. It's along the same lines of the hornet question, but Mary is having a horrible problem with what she believes are weevils. They decapitate her milkweed blossoms as well as echinacea blossoms, and she does not want to use pesticides. Has anyone else had this problem or have any advice? And folks are welcome to answer in the chat as well.
I don't think we're getting an answer in the chat. Jacqueline, is that something you could weigh in on?
Yeah, it's tricky without knowing what specific species is at play here, right? We tend to think, whatever those mechanical or cultural control techniques we think about are often very specific to the species. It's all about understanding that species life cycle and then doing things that cut off the life cycle at a certain point or make that environment less hospitable. So I would say wherever you're living, if you have a university extension office close by that can help you get an ID, that can be a really helpful first step. As far as more general steps, if you happen to see them, hand picking, I know it sounds simple, but that can be a really good step for a home garden scenario. Blasting them off with water if there are no beneficial insects around can be helpful. Those are things, no matter what the species, can be a good first step. But I would work on getting an identification, working with a local identification person that can help you figure out exactly what's going on here. And I wish you luck with your milkweeds and your echinacea.
All right. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. And thank you to all of our guest presenters today. Those were amazing projects and ideas that you presented to us. So greatly appreciate you joining us today. That was our last question. So if anybody else wants to reach out to us or Jacqueline or any of the presenters after, you're welcome to do so. But thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you.
Thanks for joining.